Hey everyone, welcome back to Sir Charles Stories. I'm so glad to have you here. But before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask, where are you from and what's your name? Drop them in the comments, let's get to know each other better. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance or what you assumed about them? Maybe you thought they were ordinary or didn't have anything special to offer. Well, today's story will change your mind. Imagine this. You're on a luxurious 250 milliliters jet, surrounded by the wealthiest, most powerful people. Everyone is dressed to impress, but there's one woman who doesn't fit in. She's mocked and looked down upon, but what happens next will shock you. Turns out she owns the entire airline. Stick around and prepare to be amazed by this powerful story. It was an ordinary day for Linda Turner. She wasn't worried about the judgmental stares of the wealthy elite around her or the whispers that surrounded her every move. She had been in their shoes before. Only now, she wasn't the one looking up at them in awe. She was the one who owned the jet they were all riding on. Linda had always been the kind of person who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Despite her vast wealth, she avoided the flashy lifestyle that many of the world's billionaires were known for. She wasn't interested in throwing extravagant parties or showing off her status. What Linda truly cared about was the company she had built from scratch. She didn't need to wear a designer dress or flaunt her riches. Her success was written in the heart of her airline. She had worked tirelessly for years to turn her vision into a reality. Starting as a young woman with dreams bigger than her means, Linda had scraped together every last penny to start a small regional airline. She had no connections, no family wealth to lean on. It was just her determination, her sharp mind, and her willingness to take risks. It all started with one plane, a small, humble jet that she used to service small towns with limited travel options. Linda worked long hours, personally overseeing every detail of the business. Slowly but surely, her airline grew. Her reputation as a no-nonsense, hard-working CEO spread across the industry. Linda's airline was known for its efficiency, reliability, and premium service. The world began to take notice. But even as Linda's wealth grew, she remained grounded. She didn't want to live a life of excess. She wasn't interested in flaunting her success like others in her social circle did. This was why, when she boarded her private jet for the first time, she wore simple clothes, a pair of jeans, a modest shirt, and no jewelry to speak of. It was a stark contrast to the ostentatious displays of wealth around her. The passengers on this jet were exactly who you would expect on a 250 milliliters jet. Business tycoons, celebrities, and influencers, all clad in the finest clothes, wearing diamond-encrusted watches and sipping champagne from gold-rimmed glasses. They looked at Linda with confusion and disdain. There were whispers among the group. "Who is she?" one woman asked. "She's wearing a simple pair of jeans and a shirt, not even a hint of designer." The others snickered. It wasn't just Linda's plain clothes that set her apart. It was the fact that she didn't seem to fit in. She was quiet, reserved, and didn't bother to engage in the superficial conversations everyone else was having. To them, Linda looked like a mistake, like she didn't belong in this exclusive circle. But what they didn't know was that Linda's modest appearance hid a monumental secret. You see, Linda wasn't just another rich person who made their money by inheritance or family connections. She had earned every penny by creating something of her own. She wasn't here because of luck or privilege. She was here because she had built one of the most successful airlines in the world from the ground up. The other passengers couldn't have been more wrong about Linda. She didn't fit their stereotype of a billionaire. She wasn't glamorous, and she didn't need to be. For her, the success of her airline was the real treasure. But despite all of her accomplishments, Linda didn't need validation from anyone on this jet. She had already proved to herself that she was capable of greatness. As the flight continued, the whispers grew louder. One woman, sitting near Linda, turned to her companion and said, "She probably just got lucky with some investment or something. But I'm sure she's not really wealthy. I mean, look at her. She's nothing like us." The woman's companion nodded, clearly agreeing, but Linda didn't let the comments bother her. She had faced worse than this. Throughout her career, she had been underestimated by people like them who thought they knew everything based on appearances. People who assumed she couldn't possibly have built a successful business because she didn't look the part. But Linda didn't care about their opinions. She was more than their assumptions. And as she glanced out the window at the clouds, she realized just how far she had come. The jet she was on wasn't just a luxury for her. It was a symbol of her journey. It was a symbol of everything she had built from the ground up. She wasn't just traveling in style, she was flying in her own creation, a reflection of her hard work and persistence. But the passengers on the jet had no idea. They didn't know that Linda owned not only the jet they were flying on, but the entire fleet of planes that made up her airline. They didn't know that Linda wasn't just a guest on this private jet. She was the one who had made it possible for them to be flying in such luxury. And she certainly didn't need to prove herself to anyone, least of all to people who had no idea what it took to achieve the level of success that she had reached. As Linda sat there, continuing to watch the world pass by, the whispers around her grew more frequent. The passengers were becoming more curious, but they were also becoming more judgmental. It was clear that they were fascinated by her presence, but they were too quick to make assumptions. Have you ever been judged or misunderstood because of how you look or act? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. As the flight continued, Linda found herself increasingly surrounded by conversations filled with superficiality. The wealthy passengers, many of whom had never known a day of struggle, talked about their latest acquisitions, their most recent lavish vacations, and the endless privileges that came with their enormous fortunes. Each word seemed to ring hollow to Linda, who had worked so hard for her success. Their lives were a far cry from the long nights she had spent building her airline, struggling to secure her first major contract, and fighting for every inch of progress she had made. Linda had long since learned to tune out these types of discussions. She wasn't interested in hearing about the latest celebrity gossip or which high-end designer was making waves in the fashion world. But today, it seemed different. The whispers around her felt louder, the stares more pointed. Every time she glanced up, someone seemed to be looking at her, discussing her presence on the jet with the kind of thinly veiled curiosity that bordered on mockery. One man, a famous tech entrepreneur, leaned over to his companion, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who do you think she is?" he asked, nodding in Linda's direction. "Clearly, she's just some regular businesswoman who got lucky. Maybe she's a consultant or something. I bet she doesn't even know what it's like to live in this kind of world." The woman beside him, a well-known socialite with a sharp eye for status, replied, "Oh, please. She doesn't belong here. Look at her. She's wearing jeans and a plain shirt. It's like she doesn't even care about making an impression. Who does that?" Linda felt the weight of their words, but she didn't show it. On the outside, she remained calm, her expression unreadable. But inside, a storm was brewing. She had been through enough to know that the world was quick to judge people based on their appearances. It didn't matter how hard you worked or what you had accomplished. People would always make assumptions about you based on the way you looked, the way you dressed, and the way you carried yourself. The truth was, Linda had always been a quiet observer. She wasn't one to engage in loud conversations or throw her wealth in people's faces. She had built an empire from nothing, and she knew that actions spoke louder than words. But in this world, people weren't always looking for the quiet achievers. They were looking for the loud, flashy millionaires who wore their success on their sleeves, eager to show the world just how much they had. Linda wasn't one of those people. She didn't need to flaunt her wealth because her true success was in the legacy she had created. Her airline wasn't just a business. It was a testament to her vision, her grit, and her relentless drive. But as she sat there, trying to ignore the growing whispers around her, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The passengers on the jet had no idea who she was, and soon they would learn just how wrong their assumptions had been. As the jet cruised higher into the sky, a stewardess came around offering drinks. Linda politely declined, but she noticed that the other passengers weren't as reserved. The tech entrepreneur beside her ordered a glass of champagne, raising his glass in a toast to his latest investment. He seemed pleased with himself, and Linda couldn't help but feel a flicker of irritation. These people didn't understand the effort it took to build something from the ground up. They didn't know what it was like to put in 16-hour days, to risk everything on a single business venture, and to have the weight of an entire company resting on your shoulders. The stewardess, a young woman with a polite smile, caught Linda's eye and gave a small nod of recognition. Linda smiled back, appreciative of the gesture, but the moment felt fleeting. She could sense that the staff was just as aware of the tension in the cabin as she was. The passengers were also wrapped up in their own worlds, oblivious to the fact that they were surrounded by someone who had worked harder than most of them ever would, just to get to where she was. As the conversation around her grew louder, Linda couldn't help but overhear the group discussing a recent scandal involving a high-profile businessman. His name had been all over the news for the past few weeks, and the passengers seemed to take great pleasure in dissecting his every move, speculating about his future, and commenting on his every misstep. One of the women, a fashion designer, who had made a name for herself in the luxury industry, turned to Linda and smirked. "I bet you've heard of that guy," she said, leaning in. "He's got a lot of influence, but honestly, he's just another fake. Everyone in this industry is a fraud, don't you think?" Linda stared at her, trying to remain composed. The woman's words felt like a personal attack, as though she was being judged not only for her appearance but for the very essence of who she was. Linda had worked hard for everything she had, and the idea that she might be seen as a fraud because she didn't look the part of a billionaire made her blood boil. But she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. It was all just noise to her. She had learned long ago that people who were quick to judge rarely understood the depth of a person's journey. They were too focused on the surface, on the superficial markers of wealth and status, to see the struggle and sacrifice beneath it all. And then, just as Linda was beginning to zone out from the conversation, the flight attendant made an unexpected announcement. The captain's voice echoed through the intercom, informing the passengers that they would be arriving at their destination in just under an hour. But there was something about the way the captain spoke that caught Linda's attention. It wasn't the usual mundane announcement about altitude or estimated arrival time. This time, the captain mentioned something else. "We'd like to thank Turner Airlines for providing this flight today," the captain's voice said. "We hope all passengers are enjoying their experience." The entire cabin fell silent. Linda looked up, and for the first time, the passengers' eyes weren't filled with judgment or curiosity. They were filled with confusion. Turner Airlines. That was her company. But no one on this jet had known that until now. The silence in the cabin was palpable. Linda could feel every pair of eyes on her, their assumptions about her shattered in an instant. It was like the veil had been lifted, and the reality of who she was began to sink in. But Linda didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated? How did it feel when the truth finally came out? Let me know in the comments below. The moment the captain's voice echoed through the cabin, mentioning Turner Airlines, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the air grew heavier, the space filled with the weight of realization. Linda felt all eyes on her, but she remained calm. She knew the truth. She had worked relentlessly to build Turner Airlines from the ground up, but now, in the span of a few seconds, everyone else on that jet knew it too. A few moments of stunned silence passed before the murmurs began. The woman beside her, the socialite who had previously dismissed her as just another consultant, turned pale. Her eyes widened and her lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She glanced nervously around the cabin as though she might be the subject of a very private conversation. The tech entrepreneur who had been mocking her just a moment ago leaned in, his face flushed with a mix of surprise and embarrassment. You own Turner Airlines?" he stammered, clearly struggling to reconcile the woman in front of him with the woman he had just ridiculed. That's incredible. I had no idea." Linda didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, letting the silence fill the space between them. It was a silence that spoke volumes, louder than any words could. The realization was sinking in that the woman they had mocked so freely was, in fact, the owner of the very company they had been flying with. But this wasn't just any company. It was a multi-billion-dollar airline, one of the most successful in the industry. It was a power play Linda had never expected to make. She hadn't come here to boast, to reveal her wealth, or to make people feel inferior. She had simply wanted to take the flight, to be a part of the group for once, to blend in. But as it often happens in life, the world doesn't always let you blend in. Sometimes your true self shines through in the most unexpected ways. The socialite, still visibly stunned, couldn't resist asking, "How long have you owned the airline?" Her voice was softer now, almost apologetic. Linda smiled faintly. "Longer than you might think," she said, her voice steady. "I built it from the ground up. Every flight, every route, every decision, it's all been mine." The passengers around her were still processing this information. Their minds were racing, struggling to grasp how they had misjudged her so completely. Linda could hear snippets of conversation as people leaned in to speak in hushed tones, their disbelief palpable. "I thought she was just a businesswoman who got lucky," one of the men said, his voice filled with regret. "She's got to be the real deal, huh?" "I told you we shouldn't have assumed," the woman next to him whispered. "I feel terrible." Linda couldn't help but smile to herself. There was something almost satisfying about watching their assumptions unravel. It was the kind of moment that made all the sacrifices, all the late nights, all the struggles worth it. The world had judged her based on her appearance, on the fact that she didn't fit the typical mold of what success looked like. But now they had no choice but to see her for who she truly was. A woman who had worked harder than most, who had defied the odds, and who had succeeded in building something extraordinary. As the minutes passed, Linda felt a sense of power growing inside her. It wasn't a power that came from wealth or status. It was a power rooted in her journey. She had never needed validation from anyone, and she wasn't about to start now. But there was something about this moment that felt satisfying. It was a quiet kind of triumph, the kind that didn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It was the kind of victory that spoke for itself. A stewardess, who had been watching the scene unfold from the back of the cabin, approached Linda with a hesitant smile. "Ma'am, can I get you anything else? Would you like a drink? A snack?" She paused for a moment, clearly unsure of how to address her now. "Perhaps you'd prefer something special." Linda smiled kindly. "I'm fine, thank you." The stewardess nodded and walked away, but Linda couldn't help but notice the look of newfound respect in her eyes. It was clear that the staff, too, had now recognized her as more than just another passenger. She had always been respectful to the flight attendants, but now she felt a sense of mutual understanding between them. They were all in this world together, trying to navigate it with grace and dignity, no matter how the world saw them. But as Linda took in the reactions around her, she knew that there would be more to come. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of recognition. It was a moment that would change how people saw her from this point forward. Some would admire her for her success, others would envy her, and still others would resent her. That was just the reality of success. But what mattered most was that Linda had earned her place in this world. She had fought for it. The socialite, still looking uncertain, finally spoke again. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I had no idea. I shouldn't have judged you like that. I was wrong." Linda nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "It's all right. People tend to judge based on what they can see on the surface, but they never know the whole story. The conversation around her began to shift as the passengers started to treat Linda with a newfound respect. The mocking tones had disappeared, replaced by awe and curiosity. Some passengers even tried to engage her in conversation, asking about the airline, about her journey, about how she had managed to achieve such success. But Linda, true to her nature, didn't feel the need to boast. Instead, she simply smiled and shared the most important lesson she had learned along the way. Success wasn't about flaunting wealth or status. It was about staying true to your values, working tirelessly toward your goals, and never letting the opinions of others define who you were. As the flight neared its destination, Linda felt a sense of calm wash over her. This moment wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about showing the world that she was more than just the simple woman who had boarded the jet. It was about a deeper truth, that in the end, it wasn't how you were perceived that mattered. What mattered was what you achieved and how you carried yourself in the face of adversity. The passengers around her, once quick to judge, were now looking at her in a completely different light. They had learned a valuable lesson, not just about Linda, but about the importance of not judging people based on appearances or preconceived notions. They had seen firsthand that there was more to success than what met the eye, and they would never forget it. How do you think people's perceptions of you have changed over time? Have you ever had an experience where you were underestimated? Let us know in the comments below. As the private jet began its descent, the once lively conversations around Linda had quieted down. The tension in the air had shifted from judgment and disbelief to a quieter, more reflective energy. Everyone, from the tech entrepreneur to the socialite, had realized something that few people ever come to understand. True success isn't just about what others think of you, it's about what you've built with your own hands, against all odds. Linda gazed out the window, watching the city skyline grow larger as the plane approached its destination. In that moment, she reflected on her own journey, the late nights, the struggles, the sacrifices. It hadn't been easy, and at times it had felt impossible. There had been moments when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing, when she wondered if she would ever truly succeed. But now, as she looked at the city she had conquered, she knew that all of it had been worth it. But what did success really mean? Was it the millions of dollars, the private jets, the billion-dollar airline, or was it something more? Linda had come to understand that success was about more than just the material things. It was about finding fulfillment, about making an impact, and about living a life true to who you were. Success, in its purest form, was not about others' opinions. It was about creating a legacy that mattered. Throughout the flight, she had been careful not to let the sudden admiration of the other passengers get to her head. She knew that in the end, those people didn't matter. They were fleeting figures in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was the work she had put into her company, the people who had stood by her through thick and thin, and the values that had guided her along the way. As the jet touched down on the runway, the plane's wheels making that familiar screech as they met the tarmac, Linda felt a sense of calm wash over her, the pressure of being judged by strangers, of hiding. Her true identity had lifted. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace with who she was. She was more than just a woman on a jet. She was a leader, a creator, someone who had dared to dream and had made those dreams a reality. Once the plane came to a complete stop, the door opened and the crew began to prepare for disembarking. Linda was one of the first to leave the jet. But before she did, she took one last glance around at the passengers who had shared the flight with her. They had learned a valuable lesson, and she could see it in their eyes. The socialite who had once dismissed her now stood a little taller, with a newfound respect. The tech entrepreneur who had mocked her now approached her with a hand extended in admiration. I just wanted to say," he started, "I was wrong. You've got my respect. You've built something incredible, and it's inspiring to see someone do that. I hope I can learn from you." Linda accepted his handshake, smiling kindly. "Thank you. But remember, respect isn't about what I've built. It's about what you can build too. If I can do it, so can you." With that, she turned and stepped off the jet, her feet hitting the ground as she felt the weight of her own accomplishment settle into her bones. It was a feeling of satisfaction, not born from the applause of others, but from the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself. She had never wavered, never let the judgments of others define her. And now they had learned that the quiet woman who had once been dismissed was more than capable of commanding the attention and respect of the room. As she walked toward her waiting car, the driver holding the door open for her, Linda couldn't help but smile to herself. The world had just learned an important lesson, the one that so many people fail to grasp. Success doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from standing out, being different, and not being afraid to show the world who you really are. For Linda, it wasn't about the money or the power. It wasn't about the lavish lifestyle or the jet-set travels. What mattered most was the journey she had taken, the obstacles she had overcome, and the knowledge that she had done it all on her terms. True success was about resilience, courage, and self-belief. As she entered the back seat of the car and the doors closed behind her, she let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey lift from her shoulders. But this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do, so much more to accomplish. She was far from finished. And in that moment, Linda knew one thing for sure. No matter what the world thought of her, she had already won. Do you think success is determined by what others think of you, or by what you build for yourself? What does success mean to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of success, perseverance, and unexpected twists. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.